And there was one teaching. There's one main prayer. If you ask anybody, a Jew, do you know anything? What's the main prayer? And they'll say it's the Shema. And it's, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And growing up the whole time, I always thought we figured out, Jews, because we're so smart, that they're not five gods. They're not all these different, gods. There's one God. We figured it out. We're so smart. And then the number, there's one. And then I was talking to this rabbi in our conversation. We were talking about one. He says, well, more importantly, beside this, there's one. There's nothing but one. Everything is part of the one. Everything is connected. That one, and the word is echad, one, just resonated with me. It's like, wow, I want to learn more about that. What does that mean? That everything that goes on is actually connected to something else. And we see it. I just walked outside in front of my house, where you've been, this beautiful plant there, and the butterflies were on the plant, and the bees were on the plant, and they were just doing their job. They knew what to do. In this world, you look every place, and there's just connections going on. I talked about it earlier, just how connected we are. There is a one that's so far beyond our understanding. I mean, now we can look out into the universe and see billions of years away, or what was billions of years away. So there was something about the awe that had struck inside of me that's literally beyond our understanding, but it's a state that I really believe is one we need more of. We could never take it all in and just be just in awe of it, which is a beautiful place to be. And that is also, it's a very ego-less state, which is also where we need to go in AA, they have a lot of acronyms. And their acronym from ego, EGO, is edges God out, which is cool. It just sort of lets you know that's because then it's all about me. And whenever we're anxious or anything, it's all about me. That's the state. And letting go of that, awe is the opposite of that. It's like, whoa, I'm in this thing and I'm a tiny piece of it. And I'm blessed to be able to soak in so much of this stuff. And I matter and I don't matter, all those things. I wish they taught that state in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Literally. In fact, one of the books that I read, it said it'd be nice to go to awe as a discipline once a day. In fact, even when I say echad, which is that one, that puts me closer to that. I do. I go one. And somebody asked me, Bert, one of your skills is to connect with people when you're with people. You connect. He said, is there a practice that you do with that? I hadn't even thought about it. But then I realized that going to that state of echad and awe and makes you connected, and I do that multiple times a day, probably does help me be closer to that state. It's a practice. I hadn't even put it together, that I actually do a practice to have that feeling of awe. So
that's really cool. I had a moment. It's kind of a disgusting example, but it's just funny because I was driving home from Melbourne last night. I was listening to a book. I think it's called The Last Highlander, and it's about a Scottish guy who went to Singapore during World War II to help protect it from Japanese invasion. And long story short was it was like a massive failure, and the Japanese, they took over, and he was a prisoner of war for maybe 2 years. And he was explaining that while he was a prisoner of war in a makeshift concentration camp, he, because they were in the tropics, they were in the forest in Singapore, I think they were. And he was explaining that one of the things that took a lot of people down was a tropical disease, a tropical ulcer. So due to the constant moisture, due to the, I don't know exactly what the cause was, but it was a flesh-eating disease where it got quite deep. He said at one stage it got so bad he could see the bone in the top of his foot.
Wow.
So he said at this particular concentration camp, there was a British doctor, and the British doctor he saw this guy one day, and he said, "Look, what you're facing, it's a tropical ulcer, but there's only one cure that we know of." And the guy goes, "Oh, what's that?" And he goes, "Well, how do you feel about maggots?" And the guy said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, if you go to the toilet, there's a makeshift toilet, and absolutely covering the toilet are just like millions and millions of maggots." He goes, the best way for you to get on top of this, go and pick up a handful of them, put it inside your actual sore. They'll eat away the dead flesh of the foot, and as a result of these disgusting little creatures eating away the dead flesh, you'll be healed." And
Wow.
he goes, it was my only option. And so he went in, and he said he had never had so much respect for these little creatures. He went in, he put it on his foot, and he said 2 days later he said he just put 5 or 6 on. And 2 days later, he said it was completely healed. The dead skin was gone, and you could already see rejuvenation taking place. And I thought, well, isn't that crazy? And I was just thinking that as you're explaining how everything's
Wow.
connected, maybe in ways that
Right.
you wouldn't even want to acknowledge. But it is hard not to admit that it's the truth. Like, and obviously that's it's a crazy story of how it works. And I know what we're speaking about is much bigger than that as well. But it's amazing how whether you zoom right in or zoom right out, it's true. Like, things have a way of just working together.